Twin sisters were forced to marry the same millionaire. But what happened on their wedding night? Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main characters. The rain had been pounding on the tin roof of the worn-down farmhouse all night, but inside the kitchen the silence was suffocating. Two young women sat across from each other, their faces almost identical, yet their eyes revealed two very different storms. Claire, the elder twin, clenched her hands so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Beside her, Lily, the younger, tried to keep her composure, though her lips trembled with fear. Across the table, their father could not meet their eyes. His debts had swallowed every last dollar. The creditors wanted blood. And then came the proposition, one so cruel it barely sounded real. A marriage contract. But not for love, not for choice. For money. The man who proposed it was Ethan Blackwood, a reclusive millionaire whose name carried both fear and fascination in their small town. His fortune was the kind people whispered about, his reputation a mix of ruthless business deals and enigmatic mystery. He had offered one lifeline: marry into his house, and the family's crushing debt would disappear overnight. But the price was unbearable. It was not simply one daughter he demanded, it was both. The twins had grown up sharing everything: the same school books, the same old coat in winter, even the same slice of birthday cake when money was scarce. Yet never, not once, had they imagined sharing a husband. Claire's voice broke the silence first. "We cannot do this. It is madness. We are not commodities to be traded." Their father's head sank lower. "You think I do not know that?" His voice cracked with desperation. "But the sheriff will seize this farm by the end of the week. Your mother's grave is here. Everything we have ever known is here. What choice do we have?" Lily's tears fell then, hot and unstoppable. She remembered the sheriff's visits, the auction signs nailed to neighbors' land, the cruelty of poverty that gnawed at dignity piece by piece. She looked at her sister and whispered, "If one of us refuses, they will take everything." The contract was delivered in a heavy black folder. Ethan's terms were sharp as steel. Both sisters would enter the marriage under his name, but only one would be recognized as his lawful wife in public. The other would remain a shadow, a presence hidden in the grand halls of his mansion. Their father's signature was already inked at the bottom. That night, while the town slept under the storm, the twins lay awake in the small bedroom they had always shared. Between them rested the contract, its pages glowing faintly under the moonlight through the cracked window. Claire whispered, "They are turning us into liars, into something less than human." Lily turned her face toward the darkness. Maybe it will not be as cruel as it sounds. Maybe he will never know the difference." But deep down, they both understood the truth. No lie stays buried forever. The clock struck midnight. In less than a week, they would stand in front of a crowd, dressed in white gowns that did not belong to them, reciting vows that were not born from their hearts. And standing at the altar would be a man who held their family's fate in the palm of his hand. Neither of them realized that the wedding night would not only expose the secret they thought they could hide, but also unravel a story far darker, far more dangerous than either of them could imagine. The morning of the wedding arrived faster than the twins had ever imagined. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in the muddy fields and in their restless hearts. The white dresses, delivered from the city in sealed boxes, hung stiffly on the backs of their bedroom doors. They did not belong to them. They smelled faintly of starch and money. Claire touched the fabric and felt like she was touching someone else's fate. Lily avoided looking at hers altogether. Their father paced in the kitchen below, the sound of his boots sharp against the wooden floor. Every step carried the weight of the bargain he had made. He told himself he had no choice, but guilt pressed on him like an anvil. The sheriff's threats had not been empty. Without Ethan Blackwood's offer, their family's farm would have been auctioned off by now. The carriage that came for them gleamed black under the sunlight. It was not a romantic ride, it was a procession to judgment. As they stepped out, neighbors gathered at the fence lines, whispering. Some pitied them, others envied them, but all were curious. After all, it was not every day that the town's poorest family married into one of the richest fortunes in the state. Inside the church, the air was heavy with perfume and power. Ethan Blackwood stood at the altar, his tall frame wrapped in a dark suit tailored to perfection. His expression gave nothing away. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, followed the twins as they walked down the aisle. He looked not at their dresses or their trembling hands, but at their eyes, as if trying to see which one of them would falter first. The vows were spoken, not from love but from obligation. Words that should have been sacred rolled off their tongues like stones. The guests clapped politely, though many looked around in confusion. Some swore the bride at the altar was not the same girl they had seen entering the church doors, but none dared to speak it aloud. The contract was sealed with rings that gleamed coldly under the chandeliers. For Ethan, it was business. For the twins, it was a cage. Claire glanced at Lily as they stood together, both wearing the same practiced smile, both hiding the same terror. That evening, as the celebration unfolded in Ethan's mansion, the truth of the arrangement began to sharpen. Servants lined the marble halls, their eyes trained to notice everything. They whispered among themselves, confused by the presence of two brides moving through the grand ballroom. Claire lingered by the windows, her reflection caught in the glass, while Lily forced herself to dance with guests she had never met. Ethan remained a silent observer for most of the night, sipping from a glass of wine that caught the light like blood. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried a weight that silenced entire groups. He was not a man used to being questioned. When the music faded and the final toast was made, the truth could no longer hide in the glitter of the evening. The sisters were escorted toward the upper floors of the mansion. At the foot of the staircase, Ethan paused, his hand resting on the polished rail. His voice, low and deliberate, broke the tension. "Tonight," he said, his gaze moving between the twins, "the performance ends. I have tolerated this game long enough. In my house, there are no shadows. One of you is my wife. The other is an impostor. Do not think you can deceive me." The sisters froze. The room seemed to close in around them. Claire's heart pounded so loudly she thought it might betray her. Lily clutched her gown, fighting the urge to run. The contract that had promised to save their family now threatened to destroy them. The wedding night had come, and with it, the beginning of a truth neither of them could escape. Would Ethan choose to expose them? Or would he play along, waiting for them to unravel under the pressure? One thing was certain: the masks they wore would not survive under his roof. The long corridors of the Blackwood mansion seemed endless as Claire and Lily followed Ethan up the grand staircase. Their heels clicked against the polished floor, each step echoing like a countdown to their own undoing. The celebration had ended, but the silence of the house was even more suffocating than the stares of the crowd had been. Ethan opened the door to a lavish bedroom, its size larger than their entire farmhouse. The walls were draped with velvet, the chandelier glowed softly above, and in the center stood a bed carved from dark oak, covered in silk sheets. He gestured for them to enter, his expression unreadable. "Enough pretense," he said at last, his voice steady but sharp. "You thought I would not notice? You thought you could slip between roles without me knowing which one of you stood at my side?" Claire felt the blood drain from her face. She stepped forward, instinctively trying to shield her sister. We only wanted to protect our family," she said, her voice trembling but clear. Ethan's eyes narrowed, studying her. "Protect your family by deceiving me? Do you take me for a fool?" Lily could not hold back any longer. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Please, do not send us away. If you end this now, our father loses everything. We will lose everything." For a moment, Ethan said nothing. He poured himself a glass of brandy from the decanter on the table, the amber liquid catching the light. He took a slow sip before speaking again. "You misunderstand me. I have no intention of sending you away, but I will not tolerate deception under my roof. So tonight, the charade ends." Claire and Lily exchanged a terrified glance. Neither of them moved. The air grew heavier, pressing down on them until even breathing felt like a betrayal. Ethan set his glass down with a sharp click against the table. "Tell me which of you I married today. Which one of you stood at the altar while the other hid in the crowd? Speak, or I will find out in my own way." Claire's lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to confess, to end the nightmare, but fear gripped her chest like iron chains. Lily stepped forward, her voice quivering but defiant. "It was me. I was the one you married." Ethan studied her closely, then turned his gaze to Claire. "Is that true?" Claire's heart pounded so hard she thought the walls might hear it. She opened her mouth, ready to take the blame, when Ethan raised a hand. "Enough," he said firmly. "I do not need your confession. I already know." "Oh, one." His words struck them like lightning. He walked toward Claire, his footsteps deliberate, each one echoing through the chamber. He stopped just before her, close enough that she could feel the weight of his presence. "You," he said softly, almost as if speaking only to himself, "were the one at the altar. The way your hands shook, the way you looked at me when you said those vows. You cannot fake that kind of fear." Claire's breath caught in her throat. She felt exposed, stripped of every defense. Ethan turned away suddenly, walking toward the window that overlooked the sprawling estate. "Do not think I agreed to this marriage out of desperation. I could have destroyed your father with a single signature. I wanted to see what kind of people his daughters were. I wanted to see if you were strong enough to face me." Lily reached for her sister's hand, gripping it tightly. "So what happens now?" she asked in a trembling voice. Ethan's reflection in the glass was dark, unreadable. "Now," he said slowly, "you will live here, under my roof. You will play your parts, but make no mistake. Every lie will come to light, and when it does, only one of you will remain by my side." The weight of his words settled over them like chains. The sisters knew then that the true trial had only begun. Their family's debts might have been erased, but the cost was far greater than they had ever imagined. As the night deepened outside, and the mansion grew silent, Claire and Lily lay awake, side by side, in a bed far too large for comfort. They stared at the ceiling, each haunted by the same question. Who would Ethan choose to destroy, and who would he choose to keep? Morning light streamed through the tall windows of the Blackwood mansion, spilling across the polished floors like liquid gold. For the twins, however, there was no warmth in the brightness. They rose quietly, the events of the wedding night still echoing in their minds. Ethan had not touched them, had not demanded anything physical, but his words had been enough to bind them tighter than any embrace. He knew the truth. He had always known. Claire pulled the curtains aside, her eyes falling on the vast gardens below. The estate was breathtaking, an empire of wealth and order. But she felt like a prisoner in a gilded cage. Beside her, Lily sat on the edge of the bed, wringing her hands. "How long can we keep this going?" she whispered. Before Claire could answer, a knock sounded at the door. A maid entered, her posture precise, her voice clipped. "Mr. Blackwood requests your presence at breakfast. Both of you." The sisters followed her down the marble stairs into the dining hall. A table long enough to seat 50 people stretched before them, but only 3 places were set. Ethan sat at the head, impeccably dressed, sipping his coffee as though nothing in the world could disturb him. He gestured for them to sit without a word. The silence was unbearable. Claire picked at the edge of her napkin while Lily stared at the untouched plate before her. Finally, Ethan set his cup down and spoke. "You will not hide in this house. You will not spend your days whispering behind closed doors. If you are to live here, you will live under my eyes." "Oh," his gaze cut into them, and Claire could not stop herself from asking, "Why are you doing this? Why keep us here when you already know the truth?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Because lies reveal more than truths ever do. I want to see which of you breaks first. I want to see which of you is strong enough to survive me." The words sent a shiver down Lily's spine. She pushed her plate away, unable to eat. Claire clenched her fists under the table, her determination hardening even as fear gnawed at her. The days that followed blurred into a strange routine. Ethan rarely spoke to them directly, but his presence was everywhere. He made them accompany him to dinners with business partners, to strolls through the estate, even to meetings in town. To outsiders, it seemed like a perfect display of wealth and family. But behind the polished appearances, the sisters traded places carefully, each taking turns being the wife in public, while the other faded into the background. Still, cracks began to show. Claire's kindness could not be hidden. She often lingered to help the servants, to comfort the stable boy when Ethan's stern orders reduced him to silence. Lily, sharper and more guarded, played her role with calculation, smiling at the right people, laughing at the right jokes. Yet when she returned to their shared room at night, she would tremble, admitting how exhausting it was to pretend. Ethan noticed everything. One evening, as the sisters sat together in the library, pretending to read, he entered quietly. "You are different," he said suddenly, startling them. "One of you bleeds honesty, the other bleeds ambition. Do you really think I cannot tell them apart?" Claire's breath caught. Lily's book slipped from her hands. Neither could form an answer. Ethan's eyes lingered on Claire for a moment longer than on Lily. Then he turned and left the room without another word. The silence he left behind was louder than any accusation. That night, Claire sat awake by the window, staring at the moonlit gardens. Lily stirred in her sleep, whispering in dreams she could not control. Claire pressed her forehead to the cold glass and whispered to herself, "This house is not just a prison, it is a test, and sooner or later, one of us will fail." In the distance, the mansion clock chimed midnight. Each strike was a reminder that their time, their secret, and their fragile bond were running out. Rain returned to the Blackwood estate, as if the skies themselves carried the weight of the secret inside its walls. The gardens that once shimmered with light now dripped with gloom, and the mansion seemed quieter than ever. For Claire and Lily, the days of pretending were beginning to blur into nights of fear. Every step in the vast halls echoed with the thought that Ethan was watching, even when he was not in sight. It was on one such night that Claire could no longer hold her emotions inside. She had been helping one of the maids clean the dining hall after dinner, insisting despite the servants' protests. When the task was done, she lingered alone, staring at the long, empty table, her heart breaking under the weight of her own silence. She whispered into the darkness, "I do not want this life. I do not want to be a lie." Her tears fell onto the polished surface, leaving tiny spots of salt on the wood. What she did not know was that Ethan had entered quietly from the far end of the room. He stood in the shadows, his face unreadable, his glass of wine forgotten in his hand. For the first time, he saw not the impostor, not the mask, but the girl who carried dignity, even in despair. He did not interrupt. He simply watched her cry until she left the room, unaware that her pain had carved something new into his heart. Meanwhile, Lily's struggle took a different shape. She had always been the stronger in spirit, sharper with words, more determined to survive. Yet the mansion's constant pressure began to chip away at her defenses. One evening, during a grand dinner with Ethan's associates, she tried too hard to act the perfect wife. She laughed when she should not have, nodded at business talk she did not understand, and in her desperation, her mask slipped. Ethan's eyes narrowed, his stare cutting straight through her performance. That night, Lily collapsed onto her bed, whispering, "I cannot keep this up, Claire. I feel like I am drowning." The sisters clung to each other more tightly than ever, but the strain between them grew. Claire's kindness made her vulnerable, while Lily's ambition made her brittle. Both feared the same thing, that Ethan would one day force them to reveal everything, and only one would be allowed to remain. The turning point came on a stormy night when lightning lit up the estate like fire. A tree branch crashed against the window of their room, and Lily awoke in terror. Claire wrapped her arms around her, holding her close. But in the silence that followed, Ethan's voice came from the doorway. "Fear shows the truth of who you are," he said softly. The sisters froze, their secret trembling on the edge of discovery. Ethan stepped into the room, his presence filling the space. "You can hide behind contracts, behind gowns, behind your father's mistakes," he continued. "But you cannot hide from yourselves, and you cannot hide from me." Claire wanted to beg for mercy, but her throat locked. Lily pressed her face into her sister's shoulder, her body shaking. Ethan stood over them, silent for a long moment. Then he turned away, his voice low but firm. "One of you is breaking, and soon, I will know which one." When the door closed behind him, the silence was deafening. Claire whispered, "He already knows. He is only waiting for us to fall apart." The storm raged outside, but inside the sisters' hearts, the true storm was far worse. Their bond, once unshakable, was beginning to crack. And somewhere in those cracks, Ethan Blackwood was finding the truth he had been searching for. Neither sister knew that the man who had once seemed like a monster was now caught in a storm of his own, one that would soon force him to choose between power and love. The storm passed, but the unease it left behind lingered in the halls of the Blackwood mansion. Days turned into weeks, and the sisters continued their careful dance of deception, trading places under Ethan's watchful eyes. But small details began to slip, cracks opening wider with every passing moment. One morning, Claire wandered into the garden, hoping to find a quiet moment away from the weight of pretense. She carried a small sketchbook, one she had kept hidden in her suitcase since leaving the farmhouse. Drawing had always been her secret escape, the only way she could breathe when the world felt too heavy. She sat beneath the rose arbor and began to sketch the rain-soaked petals. For a short while, she forgot she was trapped in a mansion built on lies. But Ethan found her there. His footsteps were silent until his shadow fell across the page. Claire's head snapped up, her eyes wide with guilt. She fumbled to close the sketchbook, but Ethan reached down and took it from her hands. He flipped through the pages slowly, his expression unreadable. The drawings revealed more than words ever could. Images of their farm, their mother's grave, Lily asleep by the window, and the mansion itself, looming like a cage. "You hide behind masks," Ethan said quietly. "But this is the truth of you." Claire tried to protest, her voice breaking. "It is nothing, just drawings." Ethan shook his head. "It is everything. You think I do not see the difference between you and your sister? She wears ambition like armor, but you wear honesty, even when you try to hide it." The words left Claire stunned. She had feared exposure, but instead she felt something more dangerous: understanding. Ethan handed the sketchbook back to her, his fingers brushing against hers. For a fleeting second, she saw not the ruthless millionaire, but a man searching for something he could not admit. Later that evening, as the family gathered in the drawing room, Ethan's gaze followed Claire more than once. Lily noticed, and her chest tightened with dread. She understood what was happening, even if Claire refused to acknowledge it. Ethan was beginning to choose. That night, Lily confronted her sister in their shared bedroom. "You cannot let him see you like that," she hissed. "If he decides you are the true wife, what will become of me? What will become of us?" Claire shook her head, tears in her eyes. "I never wanted this, Lily. I never wanted him to notice me. I only wanted to survive." The sisters clung to each other, but the fear between them had become a wall. Ethan's test was working. The deception that had once bound them together was now pulling them apart. In the quiet of his study, Ethan sat alone by the fire, the image of Claire's sketches still burning in his mind. He had entered this marriage to expose lies, to prove that he could not be tricked. But now he found himself caught in something far more dangerous. The pull of a heart he had sworn was untouchable. The game was shifting, and for the first time, Ethan Blackwood was no longer certain who was truly in control. The night of the Blackwood charity gala arrived, an evening designed to dazzle the city's elite. The mansion had been transformed with crystal chandeliers, polished floors, and golden ribbons that shimmered under the light. Every corner of the estate glowed with wealth, but for Claire and Lily, it felt like a stage where their secret could no longer hide. Ethan had insisted that both of them attend, dressed in gowns tailored from the finest silk. They walked into the grand ballroom side by side, identical faces framed by candlelight, and whispers immediately rippled through the crowd. Guests had long speculated about the oddities of the Blackwood marriage, but tonight the evidence was undeniable. Throughout the evening, Ethan played the part of the perfect host, shaking hands and offering toasts. But his eyes never strayed far from the twins. He moved with quiet authority, and his silence carried more weight than words ever could. Every gesture, every glance, seemed to tighten the noose around their secret. The breaking point came when one of Ethan's business rivals, a sharp-eyed man named Victor Harlan, cornered the group. He raised his glass with a smirk. "Tell me, Blackwood," he said loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "Is it true you could not decide on just one bride, so you took two?" Laughter erupted across the ballroom. Claire's face burned, and Lily's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her glass. Ethan did not flinch, but the tension in his jaw was unmistakable. Victor pressed on, circling like a vulture. "The entire city has been whispering about it. Look at them, mirror images. Which one is truly Mrs. Blackwood? Or do you not even know yourself?" The crowd leaned in, hungry for spectacle. Claire's heart pounded as she tried to steady her breathing. Lily looked to her sister, silently begging for a way out. But before either could speak, Ethan set his glass down with a sharp, deliberate click. He stepped between Victor and the sisters, his voice low but commanding. "You want to know which one is my wife?" His words cut through the room like a blade. He turned, taking Claire's trembling hand in his, and raised it for all to see. "This woman, and I will not stand by while anyone mocks her." Gasps filled the ballroom. Victor's smirk faltered, replaced by shock. Ethan's declaration was not just a defense, it was a choice. He had chosen Claire. The humiliation was swift. Whispers surged through the crowd, some scandalized, others awed. Victor tried to laugh it off, but Ethan's glare silenced him. "Leave," Ethan said coldly, and no one dared challenge him. Claire's chest tightened as she felt the weight of the room pressing in. For the first time since the nightmare had begun, she was not hiding in the shadows. She was standing beside Ethan, her hand in his, before an audience that could no longer be deceived. But behind her, Lily's eyes filled with tears. She turned away, her heart breaking, as the walls of their shared lie came crashing down. The gala continued, but nothing felt the same. Claire's hand trembled in Ethan's grip, and though she wanted to pull away, she could not. His touch was firm, protective, and for a moment she saw the truth in his eyes. This was not about power anymore. The masks had fallen. The secret was out. And from that night forward, there would be no turning back. The night of the gala ended in chaos. Guests whispered as they departed, their curiosity fed by the spectacle of Ethan's public declaration. The story would spread through the city by morning how the ruthless millionaire had stood before everyone and chosen one sister over the other. Back in the mansion, the tension was unbearable. Lily shut herself away in their shared bedroom, refusing to look at Claire. Her sobs carried through the halls, quiet but piercing. Claire stood outside the door, her hand hovering over the knob, but she could not bring herself to enter. She knew no words could soothe the wound that had just been carved into her sister's heart. Ethan retreated to his study, where the fire burned low. He poured himself a glass of brandy, staring into the flames. For a man who had built his empire on control, tonight had been dangerously impulsive. Yet he did not regret it. When Victor Harlan mocked Claire in front of everyone, Ethan had felt something he could no longer deny: fury. Not for his own reputation, but for hers. The following morning, the fallout began. Newspapers carried rumors of scandal. Some headlines mocked the Blackwood wedding farce, while others speculated about lawsuits and annulments. Ethan's business rivals seized the opportunity to question his judgment. For once, his wealth and power could not silence the storm. At breakfast, Ethan sat at the head of the long table as usual, but the weight of eyes upon him felt heavier than ever. Claire sat quietly to his right, her face pale, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Lily's chair remained empty. Ethan set down his fork and looked directly at Claire. "Your father will come here today," he said firmly. "I will face him, and I will end this. No more contracts, no more debts tying you to me." Her heart raced. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Ethan replied, "that your family has used you long enough. He sold you to save himself. That ends now. I will clear the debt, but I will not allow him to control your life any longer." True to his word, the twins' father arrived that afternoon, escorted into the mansion with visible discomfort. He looked older than he had weeks before, his shoulders bent under the weight of shame. When he saw Claire at Ethan's side, his face flickered with both relief and guilt. Ethan did not waste time. "Your debt is gone," he said coldly. "But hear me clearly. If you ever attempt to trade your daughters' lives again, you will answer to me. This is not a threat. It is a promise." The man lowered his eyes, unable to respond. He mumbled a thank you, but it carried no dignity. For the first time, Claire saw her father not as a protector, but as a broken man who had gambled his children's futures. When he was gone, Ethan turned to Claire. His expression softened, though his voice remained steady. "I cannot change what has been done to you, but I can ensure it never happens again." Claire's throat tightened. She wanted to hate him for his power, for the cruel bargain that had bound her here. But in that moment, standing under the weight of his vow, she saw a man who was not hiding behind money or pride. He was standing beside her, offering protection she had never asked for but desperately needed. In the shadows of the staircase, Lily watched silently. She felt the walls closing in, her place in the mansion slipping away. The man who had once been her captor was now becoming Claire's defender. And with every promise Ethan made, Lily felt her own future unraveling. Justice had been delivered, but love was becoming the most dangerous truth of all. The days following the confrontation with their father changed everything in the Blackwood mansion. The house that had once felt like a prison now seemed filled with uneasy possibility. The contract that had bound the sisters no longer held weight, yet its shadow lingered in every corner of their hearts. Claire could not forget Ethan's words. His vow to protect her, to end the cycle of control, had pierced deeper than she expected. For the first time since stepping into his world, she allowed herself to imagine a life not ruled by fear. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the estate in gold, Claire stood in the garden with her sketchbook. She drew the roses once more, but this time her hand was steady. She no longer sketched bars around them as she once had. Instead, she let them bloom freely across the page. Ethan found her there, just as he had before. He paused, watching her for a long moment before speaking. "You are different now. Lighter." Claire closed the book, her voice quiet but firm. "Because for the first time, I believe I am more than a contract, more than a lie." He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. "You always were. I was the one too blind to see it." Her eyes lifted to meet his, searching for deception, but finding only sincerity. "Why me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why choose me, when my sister was always stronger, always braver?" Ethan shook his head. "Strength is not in the armor you wear. It is in the truth you refuse to bury. In a world built on masks, you dared to stay real. That is why." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not from despair. They were from the relief of finally being seen. Behind them, Lily watched from the terrace, her heart heavy but resolute. She understood now that her path would lead away from this mansion, away from the sister she loved and the man she could never claim. For the first time she let go, knowing that holding on would only destroy them all. Claire placed the sketchbook on the stone bench between them. Ethan picked it up, flipping to the page of roses in bloom. He smiled faintly, then closed the book and held it to his chest. In that moment, words were no longer needed. The man once feared as a ruthless millionaire, and the girl once trapped by circumstance, stood together not as master and pawn, but as equals bound by choice. The mansion bells chimed, marking the hour. The storm of deception had passed, leaving behind something fragile but unbreakable. Love, born not from a contract, but from truth.